Well, okay. Well, I think it's likely time for us to ask you some questions, Shona, if you're up for a bit of an interview.
Sure.
Shona, what's the
Hi.
first book you remember reading and enjoying?
I don't um so I have been reading since before I can remember. Um my family tell stories about me reading as a toddler and being very particular about my books being put back on the shelf in the right order. So I have no recollection of the first book that I really enjoyed. They've just books have just always been this massive part of my life, of me, really. I don't think I exist
Is
without
there
it.
a point you can remember when it turned you on to fantasy? Like a sort of set of stories that made you go, oh, this is a thing I like because I've had books, but this is books.
Well, I think I read a lot. I mean, a lot of kids' books are fantasy, really. So
Yeah.
I had read, um, all of it. I'd read like every kids' book that my local library had. Um, and then when I got access to the grown-up section in the library, I actually switched to horror.
Ah.
So horror was my first love. With Stephen King. Just I read Christine when I was 13, and that was me. I was lost. Until I was about 16. And then I remember, like slouching around the house, the way 16-year-olds have such a talent for. And I'm so bored. I'm so bored. And my dad said, read a book. It's like I've read all of my books and all of the library's books, and I'm so bored. And my dad threw this massive book onto my lap and said, have a go at that. That will keep you busy for a while. It was Raymond E. Feist's Magician.
Ah, okay.
Ah,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
So it kept me busy for about 3 days.
yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
And then I was like, more, give me more.
Well,
So
fortunately, there is bloody loads of that. So,
I know. Yeah, they kept me going for a while. And then the Thomas Covenant books, the Stephen Donaldson, I read them
Hmm.
very quickly thereafter. And then I sort of bounced back and forward between fantasy and horror for
So just going
until
back
now.
to that 13-year-old Shona that's just absolutely captivated by horror. Like, what is it about the genre that just grabbed you and just wouldn't let go?
I think because it feels so possible, or when you're reading a really good horror book, it feels really possible.
Mm. Do
Um,
you think that transposes over into what you would classify as like a fantasy that's good for you, like something that feels possible?
yeah, I think that's yeah for me. I think that's when fantasy's done really well. That you can lose yourself in it, so that even if it involves, shape changing or magnificent magical creatures or earth changing powers, I think if it's done really well, you can believe that it's possible, even though it's not.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time that's down to the character work.
Yeah.
So if the people feel real, then you can go with the rest of it.
Yeah, I think if you can relate to a character, it's definitely easy to forgive other ludicrous stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's possibly part of why I fell in love with horror was because I started with Stephen King. And
Yeah.
I think he's just so good at character work.
Hmm.
So I feel like his characters are really relatable. Not always very pleasant.
No, not. I guess a lot of real people aren't either, are they?
No, exactly.
Truth. Right, we've spent hundreds of hours on this podcast bigging up Stephen King, so we're going to big up your writing instead. Right, what gives you satisfaction while you're writing?
I think it's kind of hard to describe. Um, when I feel like I'm saying something true,
Yeah,
and amongst all the make believe magic and creatures, when it feels like I'm touching on something like meaningful, or like in the short stories, you'd said with Twisted, the thing about not being different doesn't mean you're broken.
Yeah.
So like that's for me, that's a true thing. So I think when in my work, when I manage to stumble across something like that that's underneath the work, that's when I feel like I'm doing a good job.
Right.
And is that
I can't do it on purpose.
do you feel that process takes place inside like that initial act of creation, like that first draft time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I find what I'm trying to say by writing the first draft.
I tripped and I accidentally subtext. That's good.
My entire publishing career's been I tripped and it's just been one lucky accident after another.
So I mean, I know that you do.
I
I know that you have also written you've written a non-fiction book as well, haven't you, about the Jacobites?
Yeah, that's right.
So was that easier or harder than writing fiction? If we're talking about like finding sort of truth and writing true things and stuff, was writing non-fiction easier or more enjoyable for you than writing fiction?
No. In some ways it was easier because obviously I was just straight up telling the truth about what happened in a particular time period. Alongside the so it's the books about the Outlander TV series and book series alongside the Jacobite Rebellion. So it's looking at what happens in Outlander and then what actually happens in history. So it felt quite rewarding to be able to dig into that and tell the truth about what happened. It's quite a very significant point in Scottish history, but it's not one that most people know very much about, and it's quite misunderstood, I think.
Right.
So it was really good to be able to dig into it and talk about it properly. But it was really challenging as well because I'm not a historian. And because it was so significant in Scottish history, it felt like a real turning point for how Scotland related to England.
So just so people are aware of the title, so that they can find it, this non-fiction piece of work written by Shona is called "Outlander and the Real Jacobites: Scotland's Fight for Freedom." So it's quite it is as you say like a really intense moment in Scottish history.
It's a fucking wicked band name.
Outlander and the Real Jacobites.
Outlander and the Real Jacobites. Hell yeah.
Have you found that writing a whole non-fiction book like affected your writing style at all? Did you have to put a different hat on, or could you just sort of do it?
I think I did quite a lot of, advanced work and note taking and things. So by the time I got to actually sitting down to write the book, it was fairly straightforward, and it didn't feel very different, even though I was obviously telling the truth instead of making stuff up. And I did a bit of fiction in between, so I wasn't writing any novels, but I did some short stories and flash pieces to sort of keep my hand in. And also because like I would get stuck. I think whenever well, I hope everyone gets stuck sometimes, but it's not just me. But whatever I'm working on a longer project, I always hit a point where I'm like, I don't know if I'm doing this right, and I lose my confidence, and it helps me then to go off and just do something completely unrelated.
Yeah.
This actually leads us on to one of the questions that we were going to ask you later, but I think potentially asking you now would be a better choice. Which is to do with your writing process. Like, what is your writing process? So, if this is it sounds like this is an element that happens to you every time. So potentially, this could be quite useful for the people that we've got listening to understand your writing process a little bit more. So, that moment of getting stuck, what do you do when that happens? How do you disengage?
Usually, so there's always times where you'll maybe be in a scene or something and think, I'm not quite, this isn't gelling, there's something not And so that's not always I'm totally stuck. I might just be like a little bit stuck. In which case, just going for a walk or doing some housework or something. Like, that sort of almost meditative movement,
Yeah.
where my body's busy doing things and my mind
Like
can just play over it in the background.
mechanical living, yeah.
Yeah, so that's like small stuck. I do that stuff. And then I come back to the work and I maybe have an idea how to move forward. But often round about the middle of all of the longer things that I've done,
In the
there's a
middle.
point where I just lose my confidence, I think. And because I'm a discovery writer, so I don't have an outline as a general rule, and I get to this point in the middle and think I've got no idea what's going to happen now or how to get to the end from where I am. And I don't even know if these people are interesting or if this story has anything going for it.
Yeah.
And that's when I have to walk away because my confidence is gone. And I
Right.
think, like, when I try and push through that, I'll sit in front of the laptop for hours and type a paragraph and delete a paragraph. And then, it's time to leave it alone for a while.
You get
Sorry.
carry on.
So at that point, I like to go and work on something else. And I'll just go and write a short story or flash fiction or make notes about an idea that I have.
Mm.
So, not anything as grand as a plan, but some
But just get your mojo back, sort of thing. Like just
yeah,
sort of prove to yourself that you've got ideas and they're good and they're worth telling. I like that. I
yeah.
think that's useful.
And I think being able to finish something short, it gives you a little bit of your confidence back that you can finish it, that you
Yeah.
can actually write a whole thing with a structure and a plot and stuff like that,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you understand those building blocks.
Do you find yourself sort of leaping out of the bath or sprinting home halfway through a walk? Oh fuck, I've got it, and then having to full dash back to your writing zone.
Yes, yeah, it's quite like that. And I've been known to get up in the middle of the night, because I've been lying awake, kicking over something, and suddenly I've got it, and I get out of bed at 2:30 in the morning and boot up the computer. Like, right, I have to get this down while I've got it.
So it sounds like a very natural process for you. It's that up and down and back in and out and letting your brain mull it over. So how do you know when you're done? How do you know when you've hit the ending?
Because I just have. I don't,
It's just innate.
I'm sorry, I know that's
You
not
go,
really helpful.
that'll do.
Like, I think it is it's intuitive.
Yeah.
So it just feels like the end.
Mm.
It doesn't always stay that way after they
Now,
go round.
I was just going to ask you whether, like, that initial feeling of that ending, whether that is typically always the end that you do reach, or does in the drafting process does that move around a little bit?
With my first book, it moved quite a lot. So when I finished the first draft of my first book, and then I sent it to a few, beta readers, who had a look, and one of them came back and said, "You've started and finished the story too late."
Oh,
Oh,
interesting.
I talked over because I was like, "Hey, what?" And so in the first draft, I had started pretty much like the opening page was the inciting incident, and he was like, "You need to go back and give us some context before you give us this inciting incident." And one of the characters in that book throughout the first draft, he came into the first draft as a sort of small side character and then became very important as I wrote. So I had to go back and give him more of an intro so that his arc worked better.
mm.
Um, and then I finished the book earlier, and I think part of the problem with that is that book's the first book in a trilogy,
Yeah.
and the whole trilogy is an arc. It's one story, so each book stands individually with its own arc, but it's a whole story over the three
Yeah.
books. So in the first draft of the first book, I had like the first book and then a bit of what should have been the start of the next one. So it was like I was starting to bring the action back up again instead of leaving it at a nice breather.
It's exciting stuff. Just going back to the beta readers section, like that is a fascinating process. I think, and I've found. Do you have a sort of process for receiving feedback and also for giving it? Like, is there a sort of a way that you approach these things, like in order to be able to handle it and give it?
So when I'm seeking feedback on something that I've written, if it's just a short story, then I just ask on Facebook. Who's got some time to read a story, and a bunch of people volunteer.
Right.
And I send it out to them. If it's a longer piece, like a novel, then there's specific people whose feedback that I'm especially interested in, because they're maybe writing similar works, or there's a theme that I know they're interested in. So I'll approach specific people. So already I have an idea of the type of feedback that I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
It might be, I'm not convinced the structure's quite right. Or it might be, I have this sort of subplot going and I'm not sure if it's clear what's happening between the characters, or if I need to draw it out a bit more. So usually what I'll do is send them the work along with a few questions on specifics like that. And then I'll ask them for anything else that occurs to them as they read.
It's fascinating.
And obviously, because I've selected the people that I'm asking, then I have an idea of what their experience is, what their interests are, what they might like and what they might not like, and the bits that they might not like that I think stand anyway. So, I take what I want from the feedback and ignore the rest.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Good way to do it. So let's go with a hard question. What is your favourite novel?
I can't answer.
You must answer.
How could there possibly be just one?
I think that one of the best ways to look at this question is to think, rather than like you are defined by this for all eternity, instead, what's the first book that popped into your head when the question was asked? What's the mood? What color are you wearing today? That kind of thing.
So probably It.
Stephen King, nice.
Yeah.
Definitely. And is that isn't where it all started for you though? Is it? It was a different book. Sorry, you mentioned it. I've forgotten it.
Yeah, it was Christine. Was the first one that I read. I think It's far better than Christine.
And was that? Did you read it a fair while ago as well, or was that like early in your appreciation of Stephen King, or did you discover it a bit later?
I think I first read it sort of late in my teens, or maybe when I was about 20.
Mm-hmm.
But I've read it 3 or 4 times since then.
Have you got opinions on the movie adaptations?
Yeah.
Go on.
I don't like them. It's not. I think that they're fine as movies. I don't really like how they relate to the source material, but I often don't really like the adaptations of his work. I feel like they just don't really. They don't really translate so well to the screen a lot of the time.
I do just know that it's particularly pertinent today, just because as of recording. My understanding is he released an interview or something yesterday, or maybe this morning, talking about the books of his that he once turned into movies.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, if somebody asked me that, and I had as many books as he's got out, I'd just say, all of them. What are you talking about? Whatever you do with them doesn't matter to what I've already done with them. You may as well just make them all into movies.
Send me the residuals.
Yeah, just send me residuals for the rest of my life, even more.
If I'd written as much as Stephen King and someone said, which of your books do you want turned into movies, I'd have to open my own Goodreads just to be like,
thank yourself what you've written.
Yeah, I've been doing this for fucking ages. Give me a minute.
Wait, was this one from the Coke years, or was this from? Oh no, it was after that.
I know, that's because he talks about how there's books that he hardly even remembers writing because he was wasted half the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he doesn't remember writing Cujo, and I think Cujo's superb. It's like such a clever book, and yet he was just out his face the whole
Absolutely.
time he was out there.
Just riding the rails the whole time.
It's just not fair. Some of us need to work at this.
Absolutely
I
not.
mean, we haven't tried this. Maybe we should do an episode, right?
No, I think we're
Guys,
chatty
welcome
enough.
to Tiny Bookcase Inventory.
No, we're definitely chatty enough. We don't need to add a drug that makes you into an asshole.
We don't have stories, but I am working on a screenplay.
There you go. There's always a screenplay.
So, right, we need to move on for this. Do you listen to music when you're writing? And if you do, what kind of stuff do you listen to?
My preference is generally to write in silence, but I have 3 children, which means my house is often quite noisy, and I get quite distracted by, the kids fighting in the other room. So if during school holidays and things, when they're all home, when I'm trying to work, I like to put music on just to drown them out. That sounds awful. They are being supervised by another adult. It's
Yeah, of
not
course.
that.
Yeah.
So then I prefer to listen to things that don't have a lot of lyrics, because I get distracted by the words in it, and then I start typing more of the song instead of the book.
I can definitely appreciate that. I know Nico's better at listening to music whilst he's writing than I am, but I actually tried it for this story that I've written for this episode, to just the whole time be listening to music, and I used a playlist that we were pointed to by a previous guest, who I think his episode will be coming out after this one, and I found it really difficult, even when they were just no lyrics, because of the way that if the tone doesn't match what I'm writing, I found it so jarring. I found myself fiddling with the playlist too much whilst I was trying to write, which I guess is a pitfall, because I sort of can't ignore when the tone's wrong.
It's easy, mate.
Do you find that, or
Brown by the Stranglers like
Yeah,
35 times?
on repeat? Yeah. Do you find that at all, Shona?
Yeah, I do. I think if you're trying to write like quite a gentle scene, for example, and you've got really heavy music to go in, it puts you mentally in a different space than what you're trying to occupy, or it does for me. So I have to be quite careful about what music I play,
Yeah.
because it slows me down or just pulls me away from the story, because the feeling isn't right.
Yeah. Nico, do you find yourself sort of scanning through tracks trying to find the right one when you're writing? If you're using
Most stuff is fine. Although last year during NaNoWriMo, a dear friend of ours, Scott, and I were doing a sprint together, and he was listening to some atrocious, like high-pitched, punky hip-hop thing before we started, and he was like, "I'll change it." And as a laugh, I said, "No, leave it on." And I'd been writing for about 90 seconds and realised I just hadn't made any sense on the page. And it was like my brain was in a pinball machine.
Yeah.
It had never happened to me before. I was like, "But dude, I'm just unmuting to tell you, please put anything else on, anything else in the world." So I think even I have my limits.
This was during NaNoWriMo last year, I would have guessed.
Yeah.
So, have you ever participated in NaNoWriMo, Shona? Ever given it a try?
Not effectively. Like, I've tried it a couple of times.
Mm.
I never seem to make it all the way through the month. I'm not sure if I'm just not really capable of working at that pace.
It is brutal.
It is, and as I mentioned, 3 kids, so my life's fairly unpredictable because my kids are quite young. So there's always, I have this plan for how I'm going to spend my time, and then someone's off school sick, or something like that. The kids need something, and also I have a chronic illness, which makes it quite hard for me to work every day.
Oh, right.
So I think trying to put myself into that, like, I really want to do it. I want to do 50,000 words in a month because it's so, it feels like such a great thing to do. But I don't think it's really realistic for me.
Oh, that's entirely fair. Yeah, I think we gave it a go last year. Both Nico and I completed, but we did lose some of our companions along the way.
Did you feel that the work flowed really well during that time, or were you sort of struggling to get your word count in some days?
Yeah, I actually did feel like it did flow. I would say that the quality of the first draft was significantly lower than what I would normally perceive as my quality in a first draft.
Right.
Just because it was, especially towards the end of the month, it was just like it was still going, but I could tell that so many sentences were just like filler sentences that it
Yes.
wasn't like it sort of didn't really feel like, although I went well over the word count by the end of, because I think we finished about 6 days early or something like that.
Yeah. Something like
Um,
that.
it just sort of felt like I knew that I was going to have to kill at least half of those words. So I don't know how efficient it was in terms of actually producing a novel. Really, I think I probably would prefer to go at a slower pace, or just find a way to sort of fortify my mind against that. Um, Potentially, maybe that's just the first time trying it that's happened for me, but we'll find out next month, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Speaking of things that you don't get on with, what's the least enjoyable trope of fiction for you? The one that just turns you off when you read it.
Um, Strong female characters that are basically just a dude in a dress.
Okay.
I hate it. I hate it so much.
Have you got any examples?
Not off the top of my head, actually. I think I stopped reading the sort of fantasy that had that a long time ago.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What other sort of hallmarks so that we can sort of see if we can think around it?
So it's like there was a time period, I think, where people were saying we want strong female characters in our fantasy, and everyone just interpreted that to mean female warriors. So then you have female characters who battle and who joke about with the lads and, are craft and wield a sword
Yeah.
just as well as anyone and are constantly proving how physically strong they are.
Yeah.
And it, it feels like it was just really missing the point.
Someone somewhere just scribbled Aragorn, but with a minge question mark into a pad.
Savage. Oh,
And I feel like I read a load of that like in my early 20s. Like I said, I can't remember any specifics right now because I abandoned that
Yeah.
very quickly because it just annoyed me so much.
I think a lot of people in that where that trope has kind of appeared from is people trying to make a character like Ellen Ripley, who wasn't a man in a dress but was a woman with all of the qualities to fulfill the role that a masculine character could have, because
Yes.
the character was written genderless. And what they took that to mean was, well, it will just have the same character, but like with a wig on, essentially. And that's it's a horrible loss to what could be some really great stories with some really intuitive storytelling. Because
potentially though, like maybe it's a mistake that the writing sort of community, not really a community effort, but like maybe that we needed to make as a people,
yeah,
to sort of come out the other side of it. But I just positing another option there, like I mean, potentially the initial drive must have come from a place where there just simply weren't enough female characters and there weren't enough. And even though it's not actual it's like false representation, isn't it? But potentially might it have led to proper?
Yeah, I think it probably was a step, along the road to having more female characters.
Mhm.
And they weren't always damsels in distress. Because before that, the female characters were there to be rescued by the hero. But I think we obviously have much, much better representation nowadays. You've got some great female characters in fantasy of the warrior variety and the softer kind.
Both.
Yes, sometimes in the same person. It's brilliant.
Fantastic. God, have you got any examples of that? The more positive one.
Oh, loads. So off the top of my head, the main character in the Broken Earth trilogy from N.K. Jemisin. The character's name escapes me right now. Essen, is it?
It's been on my reading list for a while, but I haven't encountered it. So you're gonna have to lead me through it a little bit. Is it this is a is this a sort of like can be held up as like a how to do this really well?
Yes, I think so.
Character?
She's very strong. She is occasionally physically strong, but she's like mentally strong. She holds the people around her together. Sometimes even though she doesn't really want to.
Hmm.
You're,
um,
you're telling me there's a story where there's a character who's multifaceted, makes decisions based on their own beliefs, and has interesting. I refuse to believe any of this. It can't be done. Can't be done.
Not only that, but she's female and she's black. I mean,
Oh, I was gonna say we might have just lost some of our listenership, but if we did, good. Fuck them.
Top notch.
They're not here. They would not be here.
They would not have lasted like 98 episodes or however much we're in at the moment.
Absolutely not. I thought it was alright because it was two blokes, but then they started talking like all about books and that. Right. Speaking of talking about books and that, we were doing it. Shona, if you could adapt any book into another medium, what book would you choose? To what medium would you adapt it, and why?
tough question.
Great. I love this question. Gets brilliant answers.
See, it's so hard because I so often feel like books are perfect as they are.
That's fair.
I know
Yeah.
we did speak about Stephen King's books being
You don't
adapted
like
earlier.
it, yeah.
And you don't like it. So you don't have to adapt them to a movie. You can do it to any medium.
You could turn the Very Hungry Caterpillar into a carnival if you wanted, for example.
I mean, there's a few books that I would love to see on screen. R.J. Barker's anything by R.J. Barker. Actually, I was going to say the Tide Child books, but his first trilogy.
So
Yes,
we actually had R.J. Barker on very reasonably early in our
Absolutely
podcasting journey with
top
the.
guest.
He was fantastic. We had such a good time talking to him
or
and
he's just
telling
a
stories.
joy, isn't he?
Absolutely. So I would fully endorse him getting movie deals for his books.
I would love to see his work
Yeah.
on screen. It's so creative. Mike Brooks has this this first one's called The Black Coast. I can't remember the name of the series. Godbreaker Chronicles. I will double check on Goodreads. It's slow to load. I'm trying to check.
It's okay. Don't worry. We will, of course, cut this bit out.
Yeah.
God King Chronicles. There we go. Right, so Mike Brooks, the God King Chronicles, are excellent books, and I think would be really interesting on screen.
Are we going movies? Are we going TV series? What's the play?
No, as a general rule, I think fantasy works better in TV series. I think
Yeah.
that it needs the space for character development and to explore the world because there's so much in them. It feels like a movie never really does it justice.
Especially now they're throwing so much money at the TV series of adaptations, isn't it? It's so like it's possible. Like we're not just talking like the old sort of like 90s kind of crap ones. These
Yeah.
these HBO and Netflix and Amazon Prime and all that shit. They're all really putting up the money for them, aren't they?
You keep seeing his name out of your mouth, boy.
But you know, obviously it can work. I mean, what's your opinion on the Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings series, movie series?
I haven't seen them. I'll give you my geek card.
Oh right, really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Have you read Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, when I was young,
Mhm.
I read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings when I was about 12 or so. And I enjoyed them both and was not overwhelmed. I understand that that probably is going to make people
No,
hate me.
I mean, you can
You know?
you can say whatever you want. I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable to not like a series, and there is a great deal of love for it. But I've criticized Tolkien's writing before in the past. Like I do find parts of it extremely dry.
Yeah.
But I
I
don't.
mean, like,
The movies are very good, in my opinion. The movies are very good. It was such a magical moment for me as a kid watching them, that it's very difficult to sort of critically assay them, maybe. But I think they're pretty bloody good myself.
Don't worry, Ben. I'm going to say this quietly because then Shona can't hear me. That's how it works, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to go to FantasyCon a day early this year, and we're going to lock Shona in a room, and we're going to watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Howard Shore's soundtrack on full blast, of course.
Just blaring through the entire convention center.
Yeah.
that
Excellent.
sounds like a plan.
It sounds good, doesn't it? There's nothing like a good. Nico makes a mean lembas bread as well, so you can you can indulge. Fantastic.
Right.
So, where should people start reading your work? What should they pick up first, and where can they pick it up?
So, Ashiel Rising is the first of the Vessel of Kaladin trilogy, and it was my first novel, so I guess that's a good place to start. You can buy that, all the usual places: Amazon, unfortunately, Blackwell's, Waterstones, pretty much anywhere. That was recently re-released. So it was originally released in 2017 by Unbound, but it was bought over by Grimble Books. So it was re-released by Crystal Inc., which is an imprint of Grimble Books. It came out in June, I think.
Wonderful.
Not long ago.
Exciting.
And the other two books in the trilogy are scheduled for release soon, so they'll be out within the next year. I think.
Right. So they're all written, ready to go.
Ish.
Ish. Yeah. Classic.
My client has no further comments on this.
No, glad to hear it. That's really cool to be able to do that. I know that was something that Joe Abercrombie did with his recent trilogy that he produced. He got to a point where he could just sort of afford, I guess, to just write them pretty much all at once, and then release them one a year. Like just let them go in a proper order, completely showing George Martin up. I would like to add. Still waiting on Winds, George.
I'll add another mark to the waiting for Winds of Winter.
Yep. So they can grab this from a bunch of places, but also they can read more about your work at your website, can't they? Which is shonakinsella.com.
Yes, that's right.
Where else can people where should they follow you on Twitter?
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's at Shona_Kinsella.
Mm-hmm.
I'm most active on Twitter as far as social media goes. You can also follow the British Fantasy Society on Twitter.
Excellent. Yeah, no,
often me that's tweeting.
I was just about to remind everyone about that, because that is really exciting, isn't it? And you can get all the updates and stuff on the British Fantasy community from there, I believe, which is a brilliant thing. Really, really excellent thing to be doing. Well, I've got to say, thank you very much, Shona. That was really enlightening, listening to all the things that you've got in your head about writing and reading. Really quite exciting, and thank you again for coming on.
Yeah,
thank you for having me. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Well, now we just have an excuse to corner you at the Fantasy Festival.
Of course.
Can't wait.
I am always available to talk to people at FantasyCon.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch you all next week.
See you on the road.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast,
Well, magic can only take one so far. The tiny bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?